Hi, I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World, and today I'm going to show you how I do the straight line sewing on my Quilt As You Go blocks. I have a whole bunch of videos already showing Quilt As You Go and showing a lot of different techniques for it and different kinds of patterns that you can do, but a lot of them I drew on paper so that you could zoom out and really see what I'm doing with the whole block. I've had a lot of people asking if I can show exactly what I'm doing at the machine when I do this sewing. So that's what this one is. This is going to be showing straight line, and I've got another one that's going to be coming up soon that's going to show how I do wavy lines. First, just a quick reminder about Quilt As You Go. For Quilt As You Go, I use it a lot for applique blocks. I quilt my block first, and then I applique on top of it, and then I sew all my blocks together, add the backing, and do a final bit of quilting just around the edges. It's really important to use 100% cotton batting, and that's what this is. So it's a little bit thin, especially if you're used to using a polyester batting. It's going to look a little bit thinner. Cut your squares and then press them flat using a lot of steam. You want to get all the wrinkles out of your batting and out of your background block that you're going to be doing. So I don't use any kind of basting. I don't pin it or use a spray baste or anything like that. I have found that if I just smooth the cotton to the cotton, it's not going to go anywhere. So especially with such a small piece, you don't need to do any basting in addition to that unless you're quilting diagonal lines. And then I would probably spray baste it just because that diagonal works on the bias and you can get a lot of stretch, and the basting will just help to keep that straight. But for regular straight lines that are parallel with the edges of the block, you don't need any kind of basting. So let's take it over to the machine. A couple of people have asked if I use any kind of a special needle or special settings on my machine. I don't. I use just a regular Schmetz universal needle. I use a size 80-12. This is the needle that is my default needle. I use it for just about everything unless I'm doing special top stitching or something like this. So just a normal needle, and the only setting that I change on my machine is the stitch length. My machine defaults to a 2.5, and when I'm doing quilting, something with a thicker layer of batting like this, I usually set it at 3. So it's not a lot longer stitch, it's just a little bit longer. You don't have to do it. I like the look of the slightly bigger stitches, and also, frankly, it makes it go faster because I'm stitching a longer stitch just goes faster. So I always start in the middle of my block, and I don't backstitch at the beginning because I'm going to trim away the edges of these blocks later, and I just start stitching. I don't mark anything. I just stitch a straight line down the middle. I am using a walking foot on the Bernina. This is it's built in, so it's what this tiny little foot is back here. You know what, I'm going to flip this around. I just take a couple of stitches to turn it around. I'm going to do another line that's really close to this one, and you're going to be able to see this foot in action. What it's doing is grabbing, there's feed dogs underneath that are grabbing the bottom layer of fabric. Here it's the batting to pull through. And this is like a feed dog on the top, and it's just pulling the top layer of fabric through at the same rate as the bottom. So it keeps everything lined up. So I'm just going to do another line of stitching. That's parallel and really close to that first one. And then I just keep working my way out. I just take these little runs along the edge of the block. That's never going to be seen. It's going to be trimmed away. It just saves me from having to cut my thread and start over again each time. Again, I don't mark anything. I'm just eyeballing a relatively parallel line. It doesn't have to be perfect. I actually like it. I try to make it parallel, and I find that the amount that it's off is exactly the amount that I like it to be off. So if I try to make it parallel, it ends up just not parallel enough to make me happy. So I'm just going to work my way out to the edge of this block. Again, doing a little close one. I'm going to do one more right along this edge. I'm not going to do a parallel set. Whoops, I went a little bit too far, so I'm just going to backstitch one just to get back onto the fabric of the block there. And this is just going to hold that edge down. Now I am going to cut it. And now I've gone back to the middle and I'm going to start working my way out to the other side. I always, no matter what kind of design I'm doing, I always start in the middle and work toward one side and then start in the middle, go back to the middle and work my way out to the other side. So I'm just going to finish up this block. Do a little close. And if you go off the edge and you do your scooching over on the batting, like I'm doing here, that's just fine. All of that you want to happen on the edge that's going to get cut off. It doesn't matter where. And now on this one, I'm also going to do just one last row of stitching. I'm actually going to take it over here near the selvage, which is definitely going to get cut off. That. And I have one block done with just double parallel lines. Now I'm going to go back and I'll show you several other blocks, several other variations that you can do just using straight lines like this. So this is the one that you just watched me sew. I try to usually use a matching thread on here. A couple of these I've stitched up with high contrast so you could see better. But one thing that we can do is also just flip them over and you can see very clearly from the back what that design looks like. So I'll be doing that with flipping a couple of these blocks over. I usually just use gray thread in the bobbin so I don't have to keep changing my bobbin between every block. So that was double lines pretty far apart. Here's single lines much closer together and just a pretty much a parallel line. I'm trying to be parallel here and trying to be relatively evenly spaced. But again, I'm okay with there being some variation there. So here's another double line. So that's what I showed you how to sew, so we don't need to do that one again. You can do triple close together lines. I really like having some close together in there. When the quilt is washed and it crinkles up, having those tight spaces really looks nice. So in this one I alternated a double line with a single line all the way across the quilt, or the block. This one now, after you finish, I started in the middle and went to one side, and started in the middle and went to one side. After you're done with that, you can turn your block and do the same thing to get a grid. So this is just a pretty big grid, just single lines, pretty widely spaced apart. This is one of my favorites. I love doing a double line grid like this. I really like the variation of the bigger squares and the skinny rectangles and the tiny little squares, and that looks great when it washes up. That's one of my favorite designs to do. So this one, I'm going to flip over so we can see it a little bit better, just to show you here. So it's close together lines in going across and wider spacing going up and down, so you have a grid of rectangles instead of squares. And you might be able to, well, this is pretty light on the back too, so this one's not a very high contrast one, but I hope you can see it. And then the last one I'm going to show you, sometimes I'm deliberately trying not to get parallel lines. So I'll go wide to narrow and then wide to narrow. So I'll just kind of zigzag up and down the design, and I really like how that looks when I do it as a grid too. Then you get all of these interesting shapes in there. There are a lot of variations that you can do just with straight lines. You could do an entire quilt just with straight line quilting in the blocks. So that's it. That's how I do straight line quilting on a Quilt As You Go block. I don't baste it, I don't pin it, I don't spray baste or anything like that. I don't use a fancy needle, I don't use any special settings on my machine. I do use a walking foot, and then I don't mark anything. I just like to eyeball it as I go. I showed you lots of different variations that you can do with straight line quilting, and I'm going to link to a blog post here that's going to have kind of a menu, a map of different possible quilting choices that you can use for any Quilt As You Go designs. I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World. I'll see you next time.